Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight series is a towering landmark of modern fantasy, but that's not why it impresses me. It's also a monumental exploration of the nature of power structures and ideologies through metaphor. The story begins with an assassin in white that ninjas his way through a gaggle of guards at a diplomatic function and kills King Gavilar, who's not just a king, but the big king who united all the other rulers, high princes as they're called, under his rule. This assassin, Seth Sunsun Villano, also known as Truthless of Shinovar, has a magic sword that gives him rigidly defined and consistent superpowers. I know the hardcore Sander fans are screaming at me for this gross oversimplification, but I'm not doing an in-depth series review, just looking at one aspect of the story. So fear not, Cosmonauts, I respect the lore and I recommend the books. Though, to be fair, I've put down Rhythm of War twice. So Szeth follows the orders of whomever possesses his Oathstone. He's been cast out by his people as truthless. Specifically, he argued something that, it turns out, was true, but the leaders of his society didn't believe it, so Szeth got cancelled. He gets banished and committed to a peculiar form of slavery. He must do anything asked of him by whomever has the stone. It's not a magical hold or mind control, it's just a deep, culturally instilled sense of duty. He's sworn to obey any order given by those in possession of the symbol of authority. In this case, a rock. Szeth functions as a personification of the apparatus of the state, always following orders because it's his duty. He's bound by oath. It's the law. The morality of it isn't his concern. Like all those who obey orders without question, he is truthless. The Oathstone changes hands several times, from those that sent him to kill the king to petty criminals, before ending up in the possession of King Taravangian, ruler of one of the lesser kingdoms. Taravangian has his own interesting situation. He was granted a boon by a powerful entity in the business of such things, giving him the wisdom and compassion to save humanity. Just not both at the same time. Some days he's warm and compassionate, but a bit soft in the noggin. Other days he's a brilliant asshole. On one of those days, he wrote his grand plan, the diagram as it's known, while locked away in a room. Babbling the whole time, making connections no man had ever made before. He had scribbled all over the walls, floor, even parts of the ceiling he could reach. Most of it had been written in an alien script, a language he himself had devised, for the scripts he had known had been unable to convey ideas precisely enough. Even he doesn't understand it. He's never again had a day of such genius as the day he wrote the diagram. He didn't bother organizing it. It's often quoted according to where he scribbled a given section. Headboard paragraph 2, southwest table leg paragraph 4, things like that. Question: for what essential must we strive? Answer: the essential of preservation, to shelter a seed of humanity through the coming storm. Question: what cost must we bear? Answer: the cost is irrelevant. Mankind must survive. Our burden is that of the species, and all other considerations are but dust by comparison. Catechism of the back of the flowered painting, paragraph 1. As is typical for such things, his plan requires a cadre of Taravangist academics to decipher it. The great truth of his ideology isn't written in plain language. It manipulates language and uses its own definitions. Like so many foundational texts of totalitarian ideologies, its core writings are not straightforward, but instead serve as a path to revealed knowledge by shaping thought processes and delegitimizing other interpretations. It's less about analysis than dogma requiring interpretation by its own experts. A cult in the most basic meaning of the term. And the implementation of it involves killing a lot of people. Some of it is scientific in its own hideous way. He sets up a hospital to care for the infirm, but it's really there to collect people on the edge of death so that scribes can record their dying words under controlled conditions, which sometimes contain clues to the coming desolation. Cryptic stuff like this. He watches the Black Piper in the night. He holds us in his palm, playing a tune that no man can hear. Observed circa Tanat 1172. Subject was Sen, a member of Kaladin's squad in Bright Lord Meridas Amaram's army. Taravangian is, at least on his smart days, a brilliant man with a warped plan to save humanity. He doesn't believe this desolation can be stopped. He's firmly convinced by his eschatological pseudoscientific model, and all his actions revolve around minimizing the damage to his people in the face of an inevitable apocalyptic outcome. But the amoral, technocratic, clockwork-minded Taravangian and his assassin are not the only powers at work in the world. In the intro, where Szeth killed the king, he was taking orders from the Parshendi, a race of people that the human kingdoms had recently made contact with. Gavilar, the king, had some rather romantic ideas about the past, and he believed he'd found a way to bring back their god in the Knights Radiant, an old order of magical uber-paladins. He told the Parshendi all about this, not knowing that it would also entail the return of their gods, who were vicious asshole demons that they'd escaped at great cost. Rather than explain, they had Szeth kill King Gavilar. Not a great plan, but we all do rash things from time to time. War ensues, and for many of Voron's soul, death, desolation, ruin, and decay. The Parshendi are not a uniform population. They have different forms, different physical builds, with distinct mental alignments suited to certain roles in society. The war form is large, muscular, with bony armor plate, and is more aggressive. Nimble form for precision work. Mate form for reproduction. You get the idea. Individuals can change form as required by social need and their own interest, leading to a vibrant society with a lot of mobility and broad experience. But war is corrosive to society. As casualties mount and their destruction looms ahead, some of their scholars try to find new forms that might help them. There is a possibility, but it's not without great risk. After much debate, one of the Parshendi, Eshonai, who is in the process of setting up peace talks, agrees to take on this storm form. This proves to be catastrophic, subsuming Eshonai's personality under an aggressive, total war mindset that sees the conflict in rigid us-versus-them terms with no basis for peaceful settlement or coexistence. Eshonai has become radicalized. Her ideology becomes the core of her identity. More and more Parshendi take on this form, some of them against their will, and the radicalization sweeps through the population as the converts pull others into the storm, which is a great metaphor for how any of these radical ideologies spread, whether it's left or right or just crazy. All sorts of frameworks have been used to describe this kind of thing, from satanic influence to mind virus to mass psychosis, but in practical terms, it's all the same thing. An idea, a mindset from outside the individual exerts a dramatic and uncompromising change in understanding and behavior. In this case, the mechanism is the bringing back of their old gods. The very thing that they killed King Gavilar to prevent is what they bring on themselves in a desperate attempt to win the war they started. But militant radical ideologies don't exist in a vacuum. They have opposites and counterpoints. Returning to dead King Gavilar for a moment, he, with his brother Dalinar at his side, led a long military campaign to unify the various principalities that were once part of Alethkar, a historical but heavily mythologized kingdom of their distant past. The various subparts, principalities of this kingdom, are ruled by high princes, of which Dalinar is one. The big king is now Gavilar's son Elhokar, who sucks at the job. King can't king. All the while, Dalinar has been going down the rabbit hole that consumed his brother and starts having visions from the Almighty himself. He starts to believe that his bro was right, the Radiants are returning, the desolation is coming, and the kingdom needs to be strong to face it. It's not going to be under Elhokar, and a lot of people think Dalinar should take the throne. He ponders it himself on several occasions. Independently, some guards devise a plot to assassinate King Elhokar with that end in mind. Put your hashtag #FuckMoash in the comments, get it out of your system. And these Knights Radiant are gradually coming back, not as a grand second coming return, but rather seemingly random people gradually developing abilities similar but not identical to Szeth. And it makes for a really interesting comparison, where Szeth is bound to follow orders, any orders, without question, because if they come from someone holding the rock, it is by definition a legit order. The Radiants work on a different principle. The spirit, not the letter of the law, is supreme. Literally, they each have an entity called a spren that follows them around and will bail on them if they stray away from the binding principles, stripping them of their powers in the process. This happens to Kaladin, one of the central characters in these books. Kaladin's powers and Szeth's are nearly identical. From an outside view, there's no discernible functional difference, and yet they are vastly different in one key way. Kaladin's powers stem from moral ideals. If he ceases to be honest, honorable, defender of truth and protector of the weak, and instead slips into devious schemes and breaking oaths, he loses those powers. They abandon him. Szeth's ideal is essentially obedience. The content of the order, the consequences, that's not really his concern. He travels across the land, leaving a trail of slaughter in his wake. He feels terrible about it, and he hopes for someone to kill him in a fight. But he always follows the orders to the best of his ability. That is his truth, to be a tool of others. He personifies the totalitarian police state, an obedient and brutal servant to whatever master proclaims itself with sufficient procedural fanfare. In this case, having the special rock. In this story, Sanderson captures the essence of where our modern politics has gone completely wrong. Kaladin, the Radiants, exist to uphold high principles, and if they fail to do so, they serve no purpose, and power is denied them. This is analogous to government for the people, the kind of idealism embodied in America's founding documents. Zeth is government power for its own sake, existing as a given and waiting to be used. Ideals are irrelevant, and therefore he can serve evil just as readily as he can serve good. Where Kaladin must show discernment, must understand the effects of the power he wields, Zeth need only obey, even when a cold and brutal intellect like Taravangian is ordering him to kill vast numbers of people in the service of a murderous and, in practice, anti-human ideology. To no one's surprise, Taravangian causes a great deal of damage in his efforts to minimize damage. There's a lot of this kind of means destroying the ends in these books. But one of the core lessons to it, one that I hope young readers absorbing these books in their formative years find in it, is the relationship between the justification for power and the implementation of it. Kaladin, bound by high moral principles, loses his power when he strays from them. The Stormlight archive, aside from being a pillar of modern fantasy and a masterpiece of world building and character, shows us both the ideal and the reality of state power, and the terrible cost and danger of ideologies that justify causing harm today in the name of doing good tomorrow. I lean more Knight Gradient myself. The words of gradients are situationally dependent.